All right, good morning, everybody. Um, I'm seeing we're at 40 attendees. So I think we're going to give people about 5 minutes to join, and then we can start the discussion at exactly 10:08 a.m. So, ladies and gentlemen, for those who just joined, we will be starting the discussion at exactly 10:08 a.m. so that we can give a couple more people time to join. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is 10:08 a.m. We have about 72 people who have joined. And I think along the way, we'll be getting more attendees join us. So I think we can start with this discussion. And I'd first want to start by welcoming everybody and say good morning. So I hope everybody is warm, given that it started drizzling a while back. I hope you were able to all just get warm, grab a cup of coffee, and come to this discussion, which is very important. And it's my great pleasure to welcome all of you today to this very important discussion on decoding green financing in Kenya. This discussion is not only timely, but also very essential as we navigate the realities of climate change, sustainability, and economic growth, all packed into one. My name is Laura Ongoto. I work as a legal officer in Consolidated Bank of Kenya, and I am more than honored to be your moderator for this very important session. We are here to explore how green financing can drive Kenya's transition towards a sustainable future, ensuring that businesses, investors, and communities benefit while protecting our environment. So, why green financing? What even is green financing? What is this concept, which not many really understand, but we're here today to unpack this? Is climate change real? Is climate change a scam? And I say this in this in this era where we have a couple of stakeholders who don't really believe in it, and for the purposes of remaining politically correct, I'm not going to single out anybody, but these are the realities and these are the discussions that are being had in the globe right now. The truth is that the world is changing, and so is the way we think about finance. So green financing has emerged as a powerful tool to combat climate change, to promote sustainability, and to unlock new economic opportunities for different people. But what exactly does this really mean? And more importantly, how can Kenya harness its real impact? So, as we speak about how the world has changed, we have to reflect on the effects of climate change, which we have all experienced. It could be prolonged droughts, which have affected farmers, even our wildlife. There's been rising energy costs, which most of us have witnessed, unpredictable rainfall, and most importantly, increased food prices. These challenges have had an impact not only on the environment and also our economy and our livelihoods, and we see the ripple effect of all of this to us as individuals. So, what are we witnessing right now? What we're witnessing are businesses facing the pressure to adapt. However, adapting to this requires funding, and that is how green financing comes in. I am sure all of you have seen globally how green financing is attracting billions of dollars in investment opportunities, supporting projects in renewable energy, sustainable agriculture, climate smart infrastructure, and eco-friendly business practices. And we are in the advent today of EVs, electric vehicles. And I'm going to challenge each and every one of you, as you go outside, as you go on about your life, try and spot a hybrid vehicle, an EV, a fully electric vehicle. Some of them are even in buses, which we get onto every single day. And these are mainly the quiet ones. So let's bring it home. We're beginning to see significant efforts from financial institutions, and the government has even integrated this, as well as private sector players. They've integrated green financing into the economy. So, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to encourage you throughout this discussion to reflect on these key questions. Are we doing enough as a country? And how can we accelerate access to green financing in Kenya? All right, at this point, and to help us unpack this heavy topic, we have an incredible panel of experts with us today. So please join me in welcoming Honorable Nasra Handa, who is the CEO of Kenya Green Building Society. And then we have Ms. Marie Badiane Mbuyu, who is off counsel at Alexander and Partner. And then we have Ms. Grace Waswa, who is the ESG lead at MMW Advocates LLP, who are the host of today's webinar. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to point out that coincidentally, our panel consists of three beautiful, incredible women. And this being the month of March, we celebrate women, we honor them and applaud them for taking spaces that make the world a better place. Just a few housekeeping rules. Please note that this is not just a panel discussion. this is a conversation. I want to encourage everybody to actively participate, share your thoughts, and ask questions. Drop your questions in the chat, and we will address as many as possible. So with that, let's get started with this discussion, and I'd like us to begin with Ms. Grace Waswa, who is the ESG lead at MMW Advocates LLP. Again, they are hosting today's webinar. So, Ms. Grace, if you could kindly unmute your mic, and then now we can get into this discussion. So, Ms. Grace is going to be taking us through the Kenyan legal perspective, green financing from a Kenyan legal perspective. Basically, Grace is going to cover an overview of Kenya's regulatory landscape on green finance, which is very important actually, and which is a huge enabler. She's also going to talk about the key legal instrument and policies supporting green financing. And you're going to note that we're a bit young, but we're growing as a country towards this concept of green financing. And then now she'll talk about the challenges and opportunities in implementing green finance laws in Kenya. And we'll talk about the case studies of successful green finance incentives in Kenya. Miss Grace, karibu sana.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Laura. And thank you for that introduction.
Yes.
Really looking forward to the discussion today and sharing my perspective on green financing and together with the policies and the laws that are present.
Thank you for that, Grace. So we're going to start with the background because like we mentioned, not many people are privy to this discussion on green financing, on what exactly green financing is. So I'd like you to give us a background from the Kenyan perspective. Why green financing? Why did the regulator see it fit to adopt green financing and integrate it into our laws?
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you, Laura. I'm going to introduce who MMW is, who we are, just before I get into the question that you've asked me. Again, my name is Grace Nekesa Waswa. I am an advocate of the High Court of Kenya. I currently serve as the ESG lead here at MMW Advocates LLP. Now, just to briefly talk about who we are and what we do, we are a full-fledged law firm with a strong footprint in commercial matters, litigation, employment, real estate, and basically anything that you can think about, we are able to do that at MMW. But more importantly, for the purposes of today's discussion, one of the things that we do as MMW advocates is that we help businesses navigate sustainability regulations, ESG regulations. So if you're looking to structure sustainable investments and to understand conversations such as this on green financing opportunities, we are able to help you. Now, getting to the discussion today, and the question that you've asked me. And I love that question, Laura, because I was going through some documents recently and I found a speech by the former governor of the Central Bank of Kenya in 2021, Dr. Patrick Njoroge. And when I read that speech, it was so impressive because he started with very simple words, 3 simple words, simple but very powerful. And he said that we have a problem. We have a big problem and we need to think about it as a country. We need to think about it as different institutions operating in Kenya and even outside Kenya. And he pointed out that by 2030, and this is past studies that have been done, 118 million people, extremely poor people within Africa, will be exposed to droughts, floods, and extreme heat. You know, already as a country, we are exposed. Last year, we faced a lot of floods, which led to loss of lives.
Right.
We saw property being destroyed. We saw so much economic loss. We saw people losing their families, and it was such a devastating situation.
Right.
And according to what he was saying, by 2030, these numbers will have gone up to 118 people. Now, if you just stop and think about it, the effect, the impact of how it has already affected us and how it's about to affect us in the near future, you will realize that a conversation on financing climate action is something that is not just something that you're going to tick the box or something that's just there. It's something that's very, very much needed. This is why today's conversation is not just any other discussion. We're not just having a discussion. We're having a conversation that is a defining moment in how we shape our future and in how we look at how we address climate change.
Right.
So as you said, Laura, before we delve into the laws and the policies that are present, allow me to paint a clearer picture of why this happens. I've already talked about the data that we have when it comes to the effects of climate change on our people and on our economy. And I'd just like to say that we have seen the challenges already. Earlier this year, if you have been following the news, you saw that in the United States that there were forest fires and people were really affected. They had to get out of their own homes because the homes were getting destroyed. It is with this background that Kenyan laws, institutions, international institutions have seen that we are getting affected. It is with this background and the effects that we have already seen and the effects that these things have on our own GDP, that it has been seen fit that it is no longer a conversation of this is something we're experiencing, but a conversation on this is something we need to act on, because if we do not act on, something is going to happen. I love a statement by the former Secretary General of United Nations. He once said that we have no planet B. Literally, we have no other option. We have to work it out. We have to find solutions. And again, this is to say that if we have to find solutions, it means that we have to have money for that solution. We have to have money to fund these solutions. Absolutely. So this is the background of why climate finance is very important and green finance is very important. As we continue having this conversation, Laura, I will talk to you about the different sources of green financing, the different ways through which different institutions, whether it's here in Kenya or outside Kenya, together with the different treaties and agreements that have been put in place to ensure that we actually work on fighting this thing that we're calling climate change. You mentioned something when you started that some people think that climate change is not real, but it's something that, we just think about it and it's something that's just there. But maybe for our attendees, it's important to just take a moment and think how these things have affected you, how that shift in the weather pattern has affected you. And then that will give you the realization that it's no longer about what is being talked about or an agenda that's being put forth by politicians and different people. It's something that's affecting us. Over to you, Laura.
All right. Okay. Thank you for that, Grace. And I think that was a very good, you unpacked very well this whole topic and the background of why exactly we're bringing green financing here. And I really appreciate the fact that we've brought it closer to home because it is affecting you and I as individuals. Now, as we go into this topic, which is quite heavy. However, I'd like for us to just sort of like summarize, even in our legislation, what are the key definitions that you'd like us to have in mind as we go through this discussion?
All right. And that's a very important question. Thank you, Laura. We'll start with the basic thing of what climate change is, because again, we wouldn't have the conversation on green finance if we don't even know what climate change is. And in the very basic of terms, climate change is that our planet is actually heating up due to human activities that are taking place. So the human activities that are taking place are releasing greenhouse gas emissions. These are gases which are then heating up and causing the planet to heat up. And the effect of that is that we are having the drought that we are experiencing. We are having the extreme floods that we are experiencing. We are having different reactions by the environment due to human activities. So at the beginning of it, it starts with what we do. And actually, there was a time I was in a workshop and we were having a conversation of what exactly should we be doing in terms of bringing a solution towards the conversation on climate change. And at the end of it, we just realized it starts with us and it actually ends with us. So climate change is a very important and key definition to begin with when we talk about the conversation on green finance. Okay. Now that you understand what climate change is and you have seen, you have understood the effects of climate change, it is important that you realize that when this realization was made, countries sat down and said, oh my goodness, something wrong is happening. And if we do not act, if we do not do something about this, then we will basically have nothing in the future. Our planet will be destroyed. And they came up with something that was called the Paris Agreement. And in this agreement, countries were given their own nationally determined contributions, and we were guided as to how far we are supposed to go, how we can limit ourselves as countries, how we can limit ourselves as institutions, and different stakeholders around the world. And in our limitation or in our action towards fighting this thing that we're calling climate change, two key terms arise: climate mitigation and climate adaptation.
Right.
Now, I know these terms look like they are very heavy and, very bulky words. And anytime we have conversations on climate change, you mention that we are mitigating climate change or we are adapting to climate change, you have faces that look at you and you're like, okay, they don't get what it means.
Yes.
But simply put, when you think about mitigation, it's just cutting the problem at its root. So it's simply, we are slowing down the global warming. As I have mentioned, there were limits that were already set into place, and mitigation then comes in to slow down the global warming. It slows down and limits the human contributions to the global warming.
Right.
And adaptation, on the other hand, it's basically learning to live with change. Now, policymakers and scientists sat down and they realized that, when we want to solve the challenge, or when we want to solve this problem called climate change, not all countries are at an equal status. These human activities, sadly, are what fuel our economies. These human activities that also release greenhouse gas emissions are what fuel our economies. And if we were to cut that out completely, it would mean that, for example, third world countries will not be able to survive. So then the idea was that, how about we learn to live with climate change? And so two key definitions in this entire conversation is: one, we are doing climate mitigation, and we're doing climate adaptation.
Climate adaptation as
and
well.
And that then takes us to green finance. Because if you're going to do climate mitigation, you're going to do climate adaptation, you need money. And you don't need little money. You need a lot of money. As a matter of fact, it was estimated that around $13.3 trillion is needed to mitigate or to adapt to climate change in Africa alone. See, you have not looked at other countries. You have just looked at the countries in Africa. We need about 13.9 trillion. That's a lot of money. It means that that's money that's being pulled from either its public resources or private institutions or international institutions or development banks, basically pulling together source of funds. And so these funds directed towards addressing climate change. Green finance in itself is just money that is being directed towards projects or towards activities or towards anything that is environmentally friendly or that addresses the issue of climate change, climate adaptation, or climate mitigation. Something very key to note, and probably one of the panelists will probably mention it during the discussion, is that you will realize that in as much as we are defining green financing and we are insisting that it is money that is targeted to environmentally friendly projects or environmentally friendly activities, a lot of activities out there stand as environmentally friendly, but they are not. This brings a conversation on greenwashing. That is another term that you have to have at the back of your mind, greenwashing. Basically, when we were kids, used to be told stories of that is a wolf in sheep's clothing. That's the best way I can define greenwashing. That it looks like it's green, but really it's not green. As a matter of fact, it's something that's damaging the environment, and it causes, say, for example, institutions to go ahead and release funds to a particular project that has acted green, but in essence, it's not green. So those are the key definitions, Laura, that I'd like to mention when it comes to green financing.
All right, Grace. I think that was really good. The key definitions that we all need to keep in mind. So that's climate change, climate mitigation, climate adaptation, green finance, and greenwashing. Yeah, which I will admit is a term that I've heard today. You know how we're always hearing blackwashing, whitewashing. It's sort of like the same, but in terms of like green financing. So Grace, I think one question that I'd also ask you for this discussion to be relatable to different people, would you give examples of companies in Kenya that are actually gaining from green financing initiatives that have been implemented in Kenya?
Thank you so much for that question. One, you mentioned at the beginning that we are currently on baby steps as a country.
Yeah. Yes.
Even the entire conversation around climate change and the new terms, because you'll see that new terms will come up day by day, and all of us are trying to grasp and to understand what these terms mean. With that said, I can give a good example of a green bond that was released by a company here in Kenya, which was the very first one when it comes to green financing, and it was released by Acorn Holdings, and it was released towards building a sustainable and just an environmentally friendly student kind of institution and accommodation. Sorry, student accommodation. So that was the very first one that was released, and putting it in basic terms, it was money given and, bonds that are issued to people buy into them, and then the money is used to build a project that is environmentally friendly, a project that serves the environment in a better way. We have also seen different projects within the country. I know within Kenya, there has been a goal to plant trees. There has been a goal to increase the number of trees that are being planted. In itself, that is not something that's related to climate, to green finance, but it's something that's very connected to different projects that are being held to address the issue of climate change. But that example of Acorn Holdings, which has also actually been studied by researchers, because it was studied even in the United States, when it comes to how this was released and how successful it became. When it comes to green bonds, that is a great example that I can give on green finance. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Thank you for that. And you mentioned something which eventually we're going to unpack as we go on with this discussion. Environmentally friendly student accommodation. You know how even in different products, we see environmentally friendly facial cleansers or dolphin-friendly tuna cans and the likes. So I think that's something that we're going to unpack. And we're going to have one of our panelists speak about environmentally friendly projects, which sometimes the nexus between business and what exactly does that even mean? That's something that a lot of people have difficulty in grasping, but not to worry, guys, we're going to go into it. So Grace, another question I'm going to ask you, now that we're on the whole topic of the legal frameworks within Kenya, what are the main legal frameworks governing green financing in Kenya in a nutshell?
Right. Thank you, Laura. So going back to the statement on baby steps here in Kenya, we do not have extensive laws when it comes to green financing. However, we have soft law and we have regulations that have been released. So our major reliance is on first international law, what international law says when it comes to climate change. And for example, the nationally determined contributions that have been issued in different countries. Our constitution also envisioned this because our constitution is key. One of the principles in our constitution under Article 10 is sustainable development. Our constitution continuously talks about how we handle the environment and how we handle stuff when it comes to the environment. We have a document that was released by the Central Bank of Kenya, the Draft Kenya Green Finance Taxonomy, which is meant to help banks address the issue of green financing. So if they want to issue sustainable linked loans or loans that are related to ESG, loans that are related to green financing, that is the document that they use. They are meant to use because it helps them then look at what their risks are. It helps them assess whether this particular project is in fact environmentally friendly. It kind of gives them a metric of this is what you're supposed to be looking out for, and this is what you're not supposed to be looking out for. We also have the Climate Change Amendment Act, which was such a great move by Kenya, which then posed Kenya as one of the greatest fighters of the challenge of climate change. Because when it was amended, it went ahead to include several factors, including the fact that we have now established a climate change fund here in Kenya. The conversation on climate finance, it went ahead to just provide that provision of we can actually set aside funds to address climate change. So those are the key policy documents that are present. As I said, we are still at baby steps, and we place a lot of reliance on international law and in the treaties that we are party to, like the Paris Agreement and different treaties that we are party to as a country. However, it is very, very important to say the Green Finance Taxonomy for Banks is a very well put document, which was released. It is really well put for any institution, and actually in their introduction, what they say is that yes, they envisioned this for the banks, but any other institution can also have a look at it and look at it in a way that it can also help them in their own way to be able to identify, is this a project that is green or is this a project that is not green?
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
And I like that because myself, I'm from a financial institution, and these are the regulations that we actually need to look out for. Because as the country is moving, we need to make sure that the bank is compliant. So I know within this discussion, we also have legal personnel who are within financial institutions. So some of these laws are things that we need to take into consideration. Let's also just participate once it comes to like stakeholder engagement and where we need to give comments. So I saw someone's hand that's up. Huh? So what I'd like to encourage you for now, maybe put your question on the chat. Now, at the end of the discussion, we're going to open the floor for you guys to ask your questions. So feel free to just write your question in the chat and it's going to be addressed. Okay, my other question for you, Grace, is now, how are financial institutions adapting to these regulations now that most of them are still at the draft level? Like we mentioned at the beginning, we're still at the baby steps level. We're still young, we're still growing into this. But for now, how would you say that different financial institutions are adapting to this?
Thank you for that question, Laura, because then it takes us to the action points and what then banks need to do. And I'll start by saying, to address that particular question, a lot of institutions don't know what to do. And you wouldn't blame them because there's not a lot of clarity when it comes to green financing and what people need to do. However,
Right.
what institutions, what I have seen work, even with different countries, because again, you see that the Kenya Green Finance taxonomy that we have is not, it didn't start with Kenya. South Africa has its own taxonomy, and as they were developing this taxonomy, they actually borrowed from existing taxonomies that are present. And what these other different jurisdictions have done is continuously talk about it and train. Train your staff, train people so that they can understand what climate change is.
Mm-hmm.
They can understand what they need to look out for, either as asset managers or as different people that are working within the financial industry.
Okay.
The very first thing is, it's so simple, but it starts by understanding what this is. Understanding how it works for you, understanding how it will work for you if you take route A or route B, understanding the simplest of things, which is greenwashing. How will you be able to pinpoint that this particular project is, this is not a green financed, this is not a project that needs to be green financed. This is a project that is posing as a green project, but in the essence, it's something that is not. So the very first thing is doing the aspect of training.
Okay.
The second thing is, for jurisdictions that have been successful in terms of climate finance and in terms of green finance, there is an aspect of always conducting thorough assessments. So this means that you are constantly collaborating with one ESG expert or green finance experts or climate change experts to evaluate the climate risks that are present, because you will realize that there are so many risks that are tied to climate change when it comes to the financial sector. So collaborating with the experts to evaluate the risks that are present, experts in different sectors, in different business lines, so that you have a proper understanding of that. 3, successful jurisdictions have been successful because they have been able to understand that they need to develop key performance indicators. So this means that you're able to partner with either data analysts to establish very robust metrics when it comes to monitoring or managing climate-related risks effectively. And these KPIs then serve as critical tools for measuring whether you have moved from point A to point B, or there has been any particular progress. And it also helps you demonstrate accountability. I think those are the 3 major things I have seen different jurisdictions do. Doing so much training, collaborating with the experts to conduct thorough assessments to understand your institution first and the risks that are related to it, and always coming up with key performance indicators, because that's how we'll know whether there is progress or not.
Right. That's true. That's very true. And I think that's actually very important, especially when it comes to different institutions and integrating stuff with this. And one thing I'd also just throw to you, Grace, given that you work within MMW Advocates LLP, offer training to different institutions, to different different stakeholders, because it does go a long way. Like we said, we're at the baby steps, we're sort of like at the baby stage of this discussion, but it can go a long way once as many people as possible are trained within this, as many HRs are trained within this, as many heads of departments are trained within this. So this could actually help. But for now, one thing I was also wondering, which you could also let me know, what are the challenges? We've talked about now how we've talked about financial institutions and how exactly they should be adopting this and how they are adopting this. What are the challenges that a business face when securing a green financing under Kenyan law?
Now, the challenge, actually, it's just one challenge, a big challenge that we have. It's that people just don't know.
Right.
There is the lack of understanding of what do I need to do? Which bank do I need to approach? Which bank has even released a product that's related to green financing? Who do I need to talk to? And even when you go to the banks, there's that challenge of, okay, so how do I assess that this particular business is related to climate change? What are the key metrics? What do I need to look out for? So the challenge is not knowing. The aspect of just not knowing. And because we are at the baby steps and it's something that's continuously being released.
Okay.
And even as people are learning and understanding about it, they understand it in different perspectives. There are different definitions. There are just basically different approaches to how they look at it. The not knowing is just so prevalent. And that's why I said for successful jurisdictions, what has happened is they have trained. They have invested in learning, they have invested in understanding, and even within the governments and within the governments have in themselves invested in offering this as public knowledge, offering this as something that you need to learn, you need to understand. This is how you can go about it. That's Laura, honestly, that's the major challenge, because once we get out of the not knowing, we're working in the land of the unknown. Once we get out of that particular space, then we're able to understand, oh, okay, so now I know. So what do I need to do next? So now I understand that this is climate green finance. So this is how I need to go about it. This is how this is the bank I need to approach. This is the product that I need to get. Yeah.
All right. Okay, thank you for that. And that's actually true. And I think that also just poses a challenge to all of us who are attending this webinar, and to just go sort of in depth in this discussion and also just train your organizations or your institutions, because the not knowing is multi-pronged. It's from the one who's offering and the one who's accepting or the one who's seeking. Now, finally, and I think I just want us to answer this quickly so that we can move to the next speaker. What role does the government play in incentivizing green investment in Kenya? I think that's a very interesting question.
Indeed, that's a very, very interesting question. And I think the government has actually tried. Kenya has been a leader here in Africa, a leader in addressing the challenge of climate change and the entire conversation on climate finance in itself.
Yeah.
So one, maybe issue green bonds that are actually affordable. And I think putting it out to people for people to participate in it, opening up the doors for people to participate. Because if the doors are not opened, then how will people even participate in fighting climate change or participating in adaptation or mitigation? So what the government can first do is opening up the doors.
All right.
If there is a project that needs to be done, a green infrastructure that needs to be done, is something that is related to climate change, opening up the doors for investors and different business people to participate in it, and in a way that it's affordable. Because trust you me, Laura, people are invested in climate change conversations because it affects them. And so if it's something that's opened up to them, then it's easy for them to participate in it.
All right. Thank you. I think that's that actually really covers and really sums up most of your presentation. So we have Enoch Nyachae has spoken about the role of credit rating agencies. Enoch, I think this is a very, very, very good discussion, which I think we should have once we open the floor. It's something that I'd like for all of us to sort of like engage in. So we'll have a chance for you to come in, open your mic, and everybody else can chime in. So thank you so much, Grace. Thank you for that. You really, really, really unpacked the Kenyan perspective very well. And I think at this point, I'd like us to now discuss the investments opportunities in green buildings. Earlier on, we had talked about environmentally friendly student accommodation and such projects. And it's like, okay, what exactly is this? Our next speaker is going to help us unpack this. We have Honorable Nasra Nanda, who is the CEO of Kenya Green Building Society. So Ms. Nasra is going to speak about the role of green financing in promoting sustainable real estate and infrastructure. And she's also going to take us through the key challenges and opportunities in accessing green funding for building projects in Kenya. Ms. Nasra, welcome. You can unmute your mic.
Thank you. Hi, everyone, and thanks, Laura, and thanks, Grace, as well for your insights. Tell me.
All right.
Yes, let's dive in.
So I thought your segment is quite interesting, actually. Very, very interesting. And we've mentioned that Ms. Nasra is going to tackle green buildings. And before we get into it, please define for us what exactly are green buildings?
Thanks. So in simple terms, green buildings are buildings that are designed, built, and operated in a way that is good for people and planet. And essentially, green buildings use less energy, less water, and fewer materials. And they also create less waste and pollution than your regular buildings. And the importance for green buildings, especially in an increasingly polluted growing Africa, is that green buildings, in addition to being mindful of the resource component, they're also designed to be more healthier for people to occupy and also more comfortable for the people who live and work in them. So really prioritizing also better air, more natural light, and the cooling effect. And this is particularly important for hot climates like Kenya. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Oh, this is interesting. So there's a lot of conversations on climate mitigation when we're talking about green buildings. Okay, thank you for that. That's quite interesting. So to begin with, why should investors consider green buildings in their portfolio?
Yeah, so I think, to start off, I'd like to say that, just leaning on what you started off with, climate being either a hoax for some people. I want to say that for Africa, the climate conversation is very much a development conversation and a livelihood conversation. For us, it's not just GHG emissions. As many of you were able to see last year during the flooding that happened in many parts of the country,
Right.
A lot of people were displaced. So climate for Africa is not just about development, but it's also about livelihood. And a lot of people lost their homes, some lost their lives. And so when we think about the climate conversation in the context of now investment in green buildings, essentially from a community perspective, we're saying that communities deserve to live with dignity in spaces that have resilience in mind, have savings in mind. And when we think about businesses, we want to be able to have these businesses understand how they can build on prosperity in a very rapidly changing ecosystem.
Yeah.
Investors are not just keen on making money for these business opportunities, but they want to understand, how are you working with your communities? How are you being mindful of your ecosystem? So it's seeking prosperity in a rapidly changing world for businesses. And lastly, for government, it's about creating legacy. And so as the CEO of the Kenya Green Building Society and also a subnational legislator in Nairobi City County, I've witnessed firsthand how green buildings are not only essential when it comes to climate resilience, but also offering tangible returns for investors. And, in particular, a country like Kenya, where urbanization is accelerating. Green buildings become important because they reduce operational costs with respect to lower energy and water consumption and also occupant health. And so what the result of that is that you also enhance your long-term asset value. And a powerful example of this, in closing, is the KGBS member Acorn Holdings, which Grace briefly mentioned. So Acorn Holdings developed the first IFC Edge green certified student accommodation and successfully launched East Africa's first green bond. And so the importance for this, or highlighting this, is that this initiative wasn't just about delivering impact from an environmental or social component, but it was able to speak to a subsegment within the built environment that attracted both local and global investors. And this is important because it became the test case of demonstrating that green buildings are profitable, are impactful and can be scaled in African markets because there's a segment of young people who are moving to cities, and this becomes an important opportunity. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. There's a lot of actually very of gems that I've actually picked up from that discussion and just from you answering number one, and just giving us the definition of what green buildings are and actually seeing how they're actually more economically friendly for investors. And I think this is something that, tying to what Grace had said, a lot of people just need to know that these options are available for them, and it's exactly why they need to take it up. So my other question is, what financial incentives exist for green real estate investments? Which I think you sort of touched in your first question, but it flows into this.
Yeah, so Africa is developing rapidly in this space. And I think what's important is all of you listeners have an important opportunity here. So number one, I think it's important to highlight that Kenya, like many global South markets, are reactive markets and not proactive markets. So what does this mean? It means that often people, players in the market will not go into a space if there's no benefit or there's no, if you like, obligation. But we are in the space now. The government is currently in the process of mainstreaming green standards. And currently, as we speak, private sector players and public realm players are coming together in a working group that will explore the kind of property incentives or incentives generally that will push developments for green developments. And whether it's mortgages from a bank perspective or whether it's materials from industry players, we are co-creating what incentives for each stakeholder will look like. And so now we're moving to a stage where it's going to be more formalized. In the past, we've had some waivers on solar when it comes to certain projects. And we also have green finance options such as green bonds and concessional loans that have already been given thanks to the collaboration with partnering with the IFC when it comes to these projects. And I think, in closing also now, we also have, the IFC Edge platform, which helps developers work with the IFC, who will then offer, alongside KGBS, offer technical and financial support to developers pursuing certification. So that then you can go to the government and specifically ask for incentives to enable your project move forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. And I think you've also touched on the certifications, yeah? And so I'm going to ask, how do green building certifications now, how do they impact financing options?
So certifications like EDGE, LEED, and I'm happy to share this information with our listeners, at a later date or just, on email later. Essentially, what they do is they increase investor confidence by providing measurable sustainability metrics. And in fact, when it comes to green certified buildings in Kenya, what that does is, on the first instance, if you can report on your environmental components in your project, you are able to negotiate and access green capital pools. And when you look at certified projects, you then have these players find a smoother pathway to financing due to their alignment with ESG investment criteria and ESG or sustainability linked financial instruments. And in Kenya, like, as I mentioned before it was more, your own initiative to access this financing. And we've had some real success stories, through 3 KGBS members. I talked about ACON before, but I want to highlight 2 particular ones. So for example, MiVida. So MiVida, through a joint venture between Actis and Shapoorji, has developed EDGE-certified residential units, which appeal to both middle-income buyers and ESG-conscious investors. Right. And through this kind of business model, they've been able to access performance-linked finance. 2 examples come to mind. They were able to access a 12 billion shilling fund in 2019 through a joint venture with Actis. And what they were able to secure is a fund that allows them to develop green affordable housing projects over 5 years. And now, I think last year around August, MiVida, as a result of now their track record having done green affordable housing projects, have now sought an approval, which they got through the Capital Markets Authority to raise an amount, I think the equivalent is about 5 billion shillings to create a development real estate investment trust. And so what happens is it's the gift that keeps giving. The minute you start doing your sustainability metrics, you have the opportunity to have these conversations on incentives and then now attract more investors in this space. And then lastly, we also have IHS Kenya, which is essentially a private equity real estate fund. And they're off-takers in the market. So what they do is they tap into investments which are, around green affordable housing. And IHS Kenya launched the IHS Kenya Green Affordable Housing Fund in 2021, and the fund size is about $180 million. And what they do is now they buy or they co-create green projects with players in the local market. And Mivida actually managed to sell about 200 apartments to IHS Kenya, which was valued at about $10 million. And so what I'm trying to say is we started off at a voluntary proactive capacity, but now the government is mainstreaming this. So the sooner you position yourself to consider the E, S, and G components and certify your projects, you are able to be on the table to negotiate your terms before things are mainstream. Once they're mainstreamed, you don't have that flexibility because it's, everything's above board. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Thank you for that. So Ms. Nasra, I do understand that you do have a hard stop at 11, but I just have one more question for you. And thank you for bringing up the Mivida example, because Mivida is quite relatable to many people. I think in one way or another, somehow, we've sort of interacted with Mivida on different platforms. I think you've also, what I wanted to talk about is the major challenges in securing funding now for green developments. I know Grace had touched on, the fact that people are not, the lack of knowledge, but on your end, especially for the green buildings, what major challenges have there been?
So one of the most persistent challenges is the perception that green buildings are cost prohibitive upfront. And I think, this is not exactly true, because I think what's important is you have different green rating tools. So it depends on also what you're targeting. If you're someone who wants something sophisticated, you have lots of metrics you want to consider, that might affect, what sustainability looks like for you. My advice is always to start simple. So for example, with the EDGE tool, there are just 3 metrics you need to consider. So that's materials, energy efficiency, and water efficiency. If you start small, you'll find it's easy to manage your journey because it's not overwhelming, but also depending on the kind of project you're going for, you want to use low-hanging fruit so that you quickly transition that into profits for yourself and keep things moving forward. And I think the other thing is, aside from that cost perception, is the fact that there's a disconnect, I think, with financiers. They've not been able to understand that their role here in a proactive capacity, you have the CBK reporting guidelines on climate risks. So you are required to have a portfolio that is green. So how are you supporting the market transition into a green economy? You need to be at the forefront, working or co-creating with different industries to say, this is how we'll support greening the portfolio in real estate. This is how we're going to support, transitioning the portfolio in the different segments into green by incentivizing through tax incentives, by perhaps even tailoring financial instruments for green real estate, especially for SMEs. I've seen there's a huge gap. Women don't have a green affordable housing product in the market. So if you're a financier, please work on that. Yes.
Challenge accepted.
Yes. And however, we're actively addressing the challenge through also progressive legislation, because this is what gives comfort to investors. So for example, in Nairobi, we passed the Nairobi City County Climate Change Management Act late last year, which I proudly supported in the Assembly. And what it does is it allows now subnational governments to push for green investments at a subnational level. So you see those flooding issues you have within the space of Nairobi. Now you can have an actual project centered around addressing that at a subnational level. And so there's a huge opportunity there for financiers to see how they can support now governments or create, a public-private kind of investment opportunity, so that we can now incentivize green investments and mainstream the climate adaptation and mitigation within the built environment, within the scope of cities, so that now more people are incentivized to go the green route. And then I think lastly, at a global level, Kenya is now the vice chair of the Intergovernmental Council on Buildings and Climate. And Kenya also is participating in the Coalition for the High Ambition Multi-Level Partnerships, which is CHAMP in short. Why are these two things important to highlight? Kenya has now a leading role in pushing for buildings and climate, which means housing, being green, is going to be at the forefront of the government agenda, which also means cities through CHAMP also have visibility at a global role. And because they've made those commitments, you have an opportunity as a financier, as a professional, to say, guys, this is how we can support you, facilitate market transformation. There's legislation, yes, but you also need the technical assistance. So a lot of knowledge to developers, to financiers, to understand that you can only bridge the financing gap if financiers are walking that journey with you to understand we have to transition. And that means then the products we're releasing into the market needs to map and support this transition, so that together with that, we can position Nairobi and other African cities to be front runners in climate smart urbanization. So making green buildings more attractive, but also seeing the gender component, the youth component, in how we can then tap into both local and international investors. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Nasra. And I like the fact that you brought out that all stakeholders need to be involved in this. And it's not something that's just limited to financial institutions. We've touched on human rights defenders actually being involved in these conversations. We've touched on business people being involved in these conversations. So this is multi-pronged and everybody needs to be involved. Ms. Nasra, at this point, we'd like to release you. Thank you so much for your insights. We really appreciate, the fact that you've actually made time for this discussion. So guys, our next speaker is Ms. Marie Badiane Mbuyu, who will be speaking about the international regulatory perspective, rather. Basically, she's going to cover the global trends, driving green financing and sustainable investments, and also speak about the regulatory developments in Europe and other key markets. And guys, at the beginning of this discussion, you mentioned that Grace had talked about Kenya adopting a lot of international standards, as is the same with many laws. So Miss Marie is going to unpack that for us, and also speak about what African financial institutions and businesses can learn from international investors and regulators. Ladies and gentlemen, it's very, very important for us to actually be involved in these discussions, wherever it is that we are, our key playing fields, our platforms. It's completely necessary for us to be here, to be able to enrich discussions in other avenues. So Miss Marie, welcome. Karibu.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Karibu sana.
Yes, karibu sana. We say thank you. Or asante sana.
Asante sana.
Asante sana,
I'm
yes.
learning.
Yes, you're learning. Exactly. So, Marie, I'm going to start with the first question for you,
Sure.
and try as much as possible to also just give examples for this to be relatable for our audience,
Of course.
mainly which is people who are domiciled in Kenya. Now, what are the key international frameworks guiding green financing?
Thank you, Laura, for the question. To start with, I'd like to just present my my institution. So I work for Alexander & Partner, and we are proudly best friend with MMW Advocate. We are the German law firm. We have a strong footprint in the Middle East, and we're advising our clients in the clean tech sector in Sub-Saharan Africa. We also have an office in Accra, Ghana. And myself, I'm a French Senegalese lawyer. I'm based in Paris, and what we do is basically assist in an innovative manner stakeholders across Germany and Africa to develop clean projects. So thank you for your question. So I think to start with, and especially as a non-Kenyan, I'd like to just commend how much Kenya went far in terms of renewable, because your energy mix is about 90% clean when you take geothermal, wind, and solar. So it's I mean it's I thought it was important to start with this very very a fact. And the thing is, when we talk about green financing, like on a global perspective, it's more about how do you innovate, how do you design products that people want to invest in. So it's an engineering, what I call a legal engineering approach, and that's what I wanted to touch about, and to say that to give some examples of how do you come up with a interconnected strategy that takes into legal structuring, models such as pay service as you use it, servitization, to make more, and aggregation as well. That is very important, because the very challenge that Africa and especially Kenyan businesses are facing is that the financing needs are too small to be considered. So if we want to tap into the international capital markets, one needs to structure financing tickets, as you call them, tickets meaning the financing amount need, so that are sizable enough for the international markets to consider them. For doing this, one needs to like come up with strategies, and again do what I was mentioning earlier on, being like legal structuring and engineering. And in this regard, I would like to give like three different break down the three strategies that I mentioned, being the first one, aggregation. Aggregation speaks to portfolio financing, right? So it's important, if we take, for instance, the agribusiness sector and the farmers' needs of green financing. Each farmer has like quite small financing needs when compared to the international capital market. So it's important to build platform where all of these financing needs for each farmers will be aggregated, and then define investment strategies. And when doing this, it's very important to look at what is financed globally, go into the documentation of the different financing institutions, understand the requirements, and then build a platform and an investment case based on what these financing institutions are willing to fund. So
their policies, right?
exactly. So it's this reverse engineering strategy that I believe it's important to push forward, not only like being proactive, and not, because oftentimes what we are witnessing is that there is a huge gap between the need, as Grace mentioned it, there is like tremendous needs in terms of financing, the mitigation, and so on. But the reality is that the existing financing products and investment case do not speak to the African and the Kenyan reality. So it's important for the economic and business stakeholders to have a bottom-up approach, whereby you look at the existing situation, and you say, okay, then how can I design an investment case based on what is invested in abroad. And when doing so, it's also important to then segregate the risks, because like finances are depending of the type of finances, they are willing to finance like different type of risks, right? So what we are also witnessing is that oftentimes when it comes about mitigation of climate change,
right.
like the businesses will come, or the even from a government perspective, they will come with a bundle, we want to finance this project, we want to finance this. For instance, we want to finance irrigation. When we talk about agri farmers, but then um, not looking at the fact that like some financiers will be able to finance the technology, some will be able to finance the offtake, the project offtake based on the harvesting and so on. So and these need to be like segregated, kind of unbundled, so that you create an investment case that is investable. And and yeah, so that's the first and the main point, is to say it's more about the approach and the methodology, how we think about green finance. It's not like green finance is the most innovative place when it comes to financing.
Yeah.
Everything is yet to be created and done. And it's exciting structured finance space where we can design projects where that are investable. So that's the main message here. And and so I mentioned aggregation. Aggregation means
Mm.
you add on, yeah, you addition different financing needs, so that
Right.
you make a investment case, a sizable investment case. And and especially the needs for that is even more acute, to say, because um development financing institutions are looking for bankable projects in Africa. So
Mm.
there's the phenomenon of what we call dry powder, where you have
Okay.
financing amounts that are pledged but not used, because you don't have bankable projects to be financed.
Uh-huh.
That's what we also witnessing. So there is a need again of kind of rethinking the design of the project's space, and very much having a case by case approach, but then looking at replicating the successes when it comes to green finance. Because once you identified a structure that is working, that is bankable, then the idea is to be able to replicate it, to make it interesting for investors. Uh, so that's the point about aggregation.
Okay.
And when maybe to respond to your question about what are the drivers in terms of international regulation,
Yeah.
it's from a European perspective, there are regulations that are issued that will have an impact on African businesses that are exporting to Europe. So it's also important when it comes to aggregation to integrate in the strategy the fact that we the 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 investment aims at tackling the challenge uh, coming with the new regulation. I will give an example. You have CBAM coming online. CBAM is like the carbon tax at the European Union, the carbon border adjustment mechanism, and um, and when designing investment cases from a Kenyan perspective, one needs to look at what is Kenya exporting? Does it fall into the realm of the CBAM regulation? And how do we then build up an investment case that will allow the businesses to comply with the CBAM
Mm.
regulation, to allow them to export and not lose their existing clients. And you have also deforestation regulation that is on the EU level, that will that is impacting actually coffee farmers in Kenya. So so that's why like the aggregation strategy is very important. Is basically to say how do we come up together as coffee farmers to build an investment case, to have like a sizable investment amount, and bring that investment case to finances that are willing, that are financing this type of risks, and be able this way to tackle the risk of losing existing clients. So it's a very hand-on approach that we
Yeah.
are kind of lobbying for, and what we do. Um, so that's about aggregation. Then on the user use as a service point, why is it an interesting financing approach and strategy? It's because, for instance, when you take like German African transactions, Germany has a lot of technology to offer to tackle climate change, but then they like there is the risk of non-payment when it comes to exporting these technologies. And how this risk can be tackled is by adapting a pay as you use or servitization strategy, which means that the technology provider keeps the asset, and then the user pays it as it use it, and it allows to then to bring in Kenya or Africa, broadly speaking, new technologies without having like taking a huge risk, and facilitating their adaptation. Because then, if the client is used to the technology, then they will understand the advantage of adopting it and using it, and then the next step could be then selling or like establishing a manufacturing plant for this type of projects and technologies. So that's about pay as you use service. It's like successes that we have witnessed in West and Southern Africa. For instance, in the renewable energy sector, where you have like models where you have like pay as you use energy or cooling services that you can pay as you use it. It allows again to increase the adaptation of new technologies for climate change and climate mitigation. So that's the case B. And so case A is aggregation. Case B is pays as you use service, and case C will be like very much looking at, and it speaks to both case A and case B. How do you then structure projects that are tailored for the African space, and then replicate them? So because again, as I was mentioning, the whole point of green finance is to bring on the table new financing projects, and that can be done based on the needs of the businesses, and it's to map the needs of the businesses, and then based on that to build on investment cases.
Ah, okay. So bid on investment cases. Okay. Thank you. Your presentation is actually very robust and has touched on a lot of things. You've touched on, how global standards impact financing options for Kenya, and also how Kenya can adopt some of those international best practices. And I think the thing that echoes in this discussion is that, look, Kenya is a bit young in this situation, and we are at the point where we're slowly growing our regulations and our laws, and we're developing our robust legal frameworks and the international standards that we can actually adopt. And I think also this discussion, Marie, for you, what really stands out for me is tailor-making finance options for the projects that are here. Because the truth is that farmers that are here, the coffee farmers that we have here, are different from tea farmers in, let's say, India or whatever. So it's something that actually, it's sort of on a case-by-case basis. And it's adopted for each case. So thank you for that, Marie. Unfortunately, guys, we are this discussion is quite long, like I'd mentioned before. This is a very heavy discussion. It's something that we can even break down over a couple of series, and perhaps maybe Grace and team, this is something that you could look into, because green financing is robust. It's something that's entirely huge. The different stakeholders who are involved in this, who need to understand it for us to fully integrate it into our systems. And so at this point, I'm going to say thank you to the three ladies, to our incredible panel of experts. You have really, really, really given us a lot of insight. Myself, who I work in a financial institution, we have people who work in NGOs, people in the human rights space, people in the IT space, the tech space, agriculture, people who are just farming also. So this is something that's very key for us to take into consideration. Now, I'd like us to take a couple of questions. Unfortunately, because of time, we're going to limit the questions. And so we're going to start with Enoch's question. Enoch Nyachae, I don't know what you're comfortable with. If you're comfortable unmuting yourself so that you can ask your question, or I read it out. I don't know what you're comfortable with. If you're still on the call, Enoch.
Hi, Laura. Unfortunately for the attendees, they cannot unmute themselves. So you probably
all right.
just have to, yes.
Okay, thank you for that. So what Enoch has asked is, what role does or would credit rating agencies do in sustainable finance, considering most are now incorporating ESG rating, as most companies are? So basically, Enoch's question is, what role do credit rating agencies do? This is a very, very, very good question and very interesting.
I think what credit rating agencies do in terms of ESG is that first they integrate the compliance burden, so to say, of like globally saying, for instance, when you take a business operating in Europe and both in Kenya, then there will be there is, because of the regulation in Europe, you will have because of the regulation in Europe, you have to abide to. Then you need to have like to like the rating of the one corporate or will like kind of integrate these different regulations. So I would say that's one point. And another point that I'd like to maybe raise is that what we are increasingly seeing is that corporates and businesses in Africa are getting rated on a voluntary basis so that they can access international capital markets. And
right.
so ESG criteria also come into this strategy of voluntary getting rated so that you can access better financing to grow your businesses.
Yes, I think I might add on top of that. We also spoke about the green building certifications, which usually are incentive for different companies, which I think also now credit agencies will take into consideration. There's definitely always a criteria, and I think also Enoch, you had asked about the taxonomy regulations, and I think that's going to cover a lot of key players in this industry. So thank you for that, Marie. Thank you, Enoch, for your question. So Martha Karaoke has asked, are there de-risking organizations in Kenya that can partner with financial institutions to enhance green financing? If yes, kindly provide a list.
I think I can take that up, Laura.
Yes.
And yes, there are de-risking organizations, but there are organizations that actively engage in de-risking to enhance green financing here in Kenya. And in this context, then the de-risking would refer to reducing any financial or regulatory or any operational risk that are associated with any green project. organizations that I have seen, and I think this is something that you can also just research on and look into, but organizations that I have seen, there is the Kenya Development Corporation, which has been developing a green finance strategy to make green projects commercially viable. And how it does this is by reducing investment risks. There are other international organizations that come in to partner with organizations here in Kenya. So, for example, we have the European Investment Bank, which partners with the Central Bank of Kenya to mobilize climate finance and to also incorporate climate risk assessment into financial regulations. And a key example would be the Kenya Green Finance Taxonomy. The European Investment Bank was a key player and a key collaborator in the formulation of that draft. We also have FSD Africa, which offers so much trainings, and it also does a bit of focus on de-risking investments in Kenya's nationally determined contributions and any SDG aligned project. And how it does this, it's by working with financial institutions to develop innovative financing mechanisms. There are other organizations that may not necessarily it may not primarily de-risk, but I know they are organizations that are great collaborators, like Climate Care, which designs carbon reduction projects, and it does mobilization of funding, but of course it doesn't explicitly de-risk financial institutions' exposure. So I think that is what I know as of now, but certainly there are institutions even outside Kenya that are potential collaborators or are potential partners when it comes to de-risking.
Okay, David Chesira is asking for a clarification on the first company. She had mentioned Kenya Development Corporation, that's KDC, formerly ICDC. All right, so I'll get into the next question, which I think maybe the last question. Quincy, I think you've asked something on climate goals and existing systemic barriers, and how do we move towards sustainable financial ecosystem in the Kenyan context. I think this is something that Grace tackled in her presentation. In a nutshell, I think she just talked about how all stakeholders need to come together. We need to train. We need to we need to train institutions. We need to align policies in financial institutions towards green financing, and just make sure that everybody is in the know that this is something that's available to them. Because the moment everybody is on the know, that's how we progress our legislation and our laws. Because that way you move step by step. So Quincy, I hope that answers the question.
Laura, sorry, just to add to, and thank you for adding that,
Yes.
But just to also add to what you've said, I think we all know how ambitious our climate goals are, but the systemic barriers that we keep facing every time when you want to move forward, they become a big challenge. And one thing I have seen that works even with other countries, it has been for countries to accelerate that transition towards a sustainable financial ecosystem. What they've done is following innovative policy and market-based mechanisms. So yes, we do have policy that exists. We have a green financing taxonomy, but just looking at how to properly innovate it, bring in something that touches into the same thing, but in a different way. I think that is something that is very, very, very helpful, because again, I've said the systemic challenges continue to remain present, but if we are not able to look at it in an innovative way, if you're not able to look at it in a way that's a little bit different, it's not going to work. An example can be, I saw that Brazil is doing something called, I think it's Amazon rainforest bonds. And so that is a nature-backed sovereign bond. We do issue green bonds. We have green bonds that we have issued, but a next level innovation would be something that's nature-backed, something that is a sovereign bond, whereby the returns are linked to the ecosystem restoration metrics. So I think the main point is innovating how we approach this thing so that we can move forward in a way that is effective and productive.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Grace. So we have a question from John Kiplagat. He's asked, what are the geopolitical implications of climate finance? What are the geopolitical implications of climate finance dependence on multilateral lenders, and how can Kenya attract more private capital? That's a very interesting question. What are the geopolitical implications of climate finance dependence on multilateral lenders, and how can Kenya attract more private capital?
Maybe I can take
That's a
this
great.
one.
Oh, sorry.
Maybe Grace, you want to take it. It's fine.
Yeah, that's a great question, because just recently we were seeing the effects of our dependence on international organizations and how that has affected us with the USAID thing. And to be quite honest, we saw that over-dependence is something that has cost us and will continue costing us if we are not able to think about it or to think around it in a way that is, effective and innovative. But that said, climate financing itself is not just about funding sustainability. It has become a geopolitical tool. So it helps in shaping alliances, it helps in trade relations, it helps in power dynamics between nations, because again, it's something that's always on the table. And so as countries continue to secure climate financing, these political stakes and these economic stakes and these strategic stakes remain, they continue increasing. But onto your question, how geopolitical influences the flow of climate finance here in Kenya, I can say one, it creates something that's a soft power tool. So green finance in itself, it becomes something like that's a soft power tool. So for example, wealthy nations such as the United States, for example, will use green finance to expand their influence in emerging markets. Climate aid and loans become very strategic conditions, such as then you need to adopt certain technologies, or you need to align with certain policies to deal with or to access some donor priorities. But how, as a country, or how as African countries can set themselves apart from these soft power tools that wealthy nations are using is by one, working within. I think we have a very robust and very, very good regional community. And if regionally, say, for example, the East African community or the African Union could work together to actually come up with something that they can stand with before the wealthy nations, then that soft power tool will not be used against us. We already have, what are they called? The development banks, and we have one here in Africa. And standing with the funding that comes from development banks in Africa, African nations can actually stand together and continue financing, or whatever fund that is within the development bank, to use that funding to finance their green financing projects or to finance their climate-related projects. The long and short is that green finance is a soft power tool, and that is the reality of it. Wealthy nations will continue using it, will always use it to expand their influence to developing countries such as ours. However, it is the unity of regional institutions, the unity of institutions such as SADC, institutions such as the East African Community or the African Union, that will enable us move from that leveraging point that wealthy nations are using against us. Because again, we want to move from the interdependence, or from the dependence of wealthy nations, to how we can do it on our own. But just to finalize, it's important to state that even in as much as we are looking for independence as African nations, and we're looking for independence as, say, for example, nations in the East African community, we will still need to put the wealthy nations, or to put these other nations, accountable, because again, as we do not emit as much as they emit. So at the end of the day, we will still need to put them on the table and make them realize that they need to continue funding whatever it is that's happening, because it is them. A lot of emissions do come from their end. I hope that makes sense.
All right. Okay. Thank you so much, Grace. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Unfortunately, we have to come to a hard stop. The webinar has actually surpassed by 30 minutes, meaning that this is a discussion that's very needed. There's a lot more questions that I can see on the chat. However, what we can do is that you can reach out to each of us. So Unfortunately, we have to come to an end to today's webinar on green financing in Kenya. This discussion has been super insightful, both locally and globally, and we've explored the impact of climate change on businesses, communities, and how green financing can drive solutions that are both profitable and sustainable. And I just want to say a huge thank you to our incredible panelists for sharing their expertise, and to all of you for your active participation. We've all learned a lot from each other. I think we can say that. And this engagement and questions, they've really, really enriched this discussion. So moving forward, we want to encourage everybody to take today's insights and explore how this green financing can be applied to our different sectors. So we will be sharing key highlights and resources from the webinar on the LinkedIn page for MMW Advocates LLP, and feel free to connect with each of us on LinkedIn. Everybody who's been a panelist and myself as well on LinkedIn. So just feel free to reach out, drop a DM or a message, or wherever it is that you saw this webinar. Feel free to reach out to whoever to link you up to everybody who's involved in this. So again, guys, thank you so much for being part of this important conversation. Let's keep working towards a greener and more resilient Kenya, and I wish you all a great day ahead. Bye-bye.